Throughout the castle, along its dark passages, through arches and aisles, in chambers large and small, in the filthy dungeons and cells drenched in death, that triangular icon was to be seen, a pilgrim's talisman, a hunter's supplication, a prisoner's reckoning. In the ceremonial chamber, the pools of light lost their radiance. The sun had passed over. The Skeksis began to stir their swaddled bodies again, walking on their hind legs, forelegs poised in the air, talons arched, their heads protruding from humped cowls, thrust out as if to strike. They watched each other closely. The Emperor had not appeared. Skeknar the slave master nodded a signal to a balcony built into the rock high above beside the crystal. A cover was slowly closed across the triangular portal at the summit of the tower. Outside the castle, the storm started to intensify. A creature that might have been a bird or a bat rose into the air from the battlements. In its claws, it clutched a small piece of crystal as it flew away across the landscape, its wings beating with slow deliberation. Another creature of the same breed followed it, and others still heading off in different directions, each grasping a piece of crystal. The storm was closer to the valley now. Jen looked up at the sky. Its colours were reflected on the shivering pool. Soon he would have to find shelter in one of the vacant caves along the spiral pathway. For the time being, he willed himself to stay beside the pool above the waterfall, playing his flute until the last possible moment. His quiet, secure life among the Uru seldom presented him with the opportunity to be a little brave. He leaned forward and gazed directly down into the pool. "Is that a brave face?" he asked himself aloud. Although the water was not still, he knew his face well enough to see it plainly reflected on the shifting surface. Under the fringe of thick, dark hair was a countenance made almost triangular by the wide cheekbones tapering into a small chin. His large eyes were set well apart on either side of a flattish nose. His gelfling face was framed by long hair through which his pointed ears protruded. A brave face? He had asked that question often enough, and others. A handsome face, was it? An intelligent one? Sad? Stern? Was it even memorable? All he had for comparison were the lugubrious faces of the Uru. Their aged, wrinkled eyes were so different from his bright ones. The skin on their faces was old, deeply lined with runic patterns. Their faces were not even in the same place as was Jen's, but thrust forward on long, thick necks that were covered with manes of grey hair. When they walked, with their heavy, slightly swaying gait on their two powerful legs, their massive long tails were not heavy enough to counterbalance the weight of their heads. They had to lean on walking sticks, which they held in front of them with one of their pairs of forearms, while their hind arms hung down toward the ground. Their heads were ponderous with wisdom, perhaps, or with memory, or with listening. Their immensely slow and considered movements were made weightier yet by the garment each of them wore, something between a coat and a saddle blanket. These garments had been made for them by Urut the weaver, and were fashioned to the individual by the system of knotting threads that he used. The complex pattern of knots formed a cybernetic store for each wearer's thoughts, be they the medicinal knowledge of Ernol the herbalist, the astronomic records of Yod the numerologist, the macrobiotic balances of Amaj the cook, or any other of the bodies of erudition that the Uru had been collecting for many eons. The garments were dusty and worn with age, but the colours had remained fast, and the threads had not frayed because Urut had used no scissors. How could Jen ever have learned about himself by comparison, with creatures so entirely different and so much larger, 100 times heavier quite probably? Everything they had taught him, which was a great deal, had been taught by precept. They could give no examples, not only because of their different physical beings, but also because the knowledge they had was absolutely conceptual. Nothing happened, nothing was apprehended, but it was instantly translated by the Uru into an idea and matched with all the other ideas accreted over the eons like the dust on their garments. The spirals and runes in the skin of their heads were the grooves of coded thought, representing a symbolic interpretation of each Uru's total past, from which at any moment the future might have been projected by one who could systematically construe the signs. The habitual sadness of their expressions and the marked slowness of their low, resonant speech were evidence of their cerebral natures. Anyone who had ever met the Uru might have supposed at first that they laboured under a collective guilt, such was their lack of spontaneous action. "A brave face?" Jen shrugged and sat down again. The storm was heading inexorably in the direction of the valley. The sky was dark now, and a chill edge in the air heralded the first rainfall. Jen played a tune, trying to finger harmonies that might answer the thunderclouds. He double-stopped one pipe on the flute as a kind of chanter, and on the other experimented with the quarter-tone effects he had discovered by partial stopping. He tapped his foot in a slow rhythm, shut his eyes, and improvised a sinuous melody. Da 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 da. When lightning cracked nearby, Jen opened his eyes again. Someone was behind him and towering over him, someone he had not heard approaching. He turned around quickly. It was Urzar, the ritual guardian, standing up straight on his haunched legs, his forearms spread-eagled, with his cane pointing to the sky. "Pardon, Ancient One," Jen said, fearing his flute might have interrupted Urzar's thinking. "I did not mean to disturb you." Although Jen reasoned surely even an Uru's contemplation must be penetrated by a storm such as this. Urzar answered in the fashion of the Uru, very slowly with long pauses. "To mean is not to do," he said. "To make a sound," he reflected for a long time, "is to trouble the roots of silence. To play the flute is to make a slave of air." Jen turned away impatiently. "I know," he replied. "You've told me that before." At once he wished he had not sounded the note of rudeness. It was not that he had any fear of punishment. In all his time with the Uru, none of them had ever chastised him, however subtly. Whenever he had spoken or behaved badly, the worst that had ensued, after a long meditative pause, was a sombre sentence of philosophical correction. He doubted, in fact, that it was possible to upset one of them. No, he regretted what he had said only because it muffled the genuine respect he felt for Urzar and all the others. Still, as the Uru themselves quite often said, a word spoken is a step taken. Jen sat there feeling awkward. He fingered his flute, but thought he had better not play it in case it was offending Urzar. The Uru had not made a move, but was still standing over Jen, his head cocked. Then he said, "In your cave, there is one who has need." "My master?" Jen asked. He stood up with a little stab of anxiety. His master, Ursu, had never before sent for him in the middle of the day. Why now? Urzar was gazing at the sky. "The storm comes," he observed. "It is time. Time of change. Time of trial." So that was it. Something was to change and be tested. That was what the storm portended. Jen looked into Urzar's weary, kind face and nodded hesitantly. He had always known that this day sooner or later would come. The skills and intuitions that the Uru had cultivated in him while sheltering his childhood were always designed to prepare Jen for some task. The Uru had never told him what the task would be, and truth to tell, Jen had never pressed them for an explanation. With all his wishing that things could be altered, that the Uru would let him roam more freely, and especially that all the other Gelfling would come back and live with him, he did not want to lose what he had. He ran up the spiral pathway. He was only just in time. The storm was breaking on the valley now. The wind, it was blowing about more than dust and spray from the waterfalls. The very stones were being shaken by it. Jen could feel little pebbles pattering on his skin. Why were Urim the healer, Ernol the herbalist, and Ursol the chanter standing together outside the cave Jen shared with Ursu? Was there danger in this storm? What were they talking about? The three Uru moved aside, slowly, to let him pass. What must it be like for them, he wondered, to be so heavy and slow, and see one running as fleetly as he did?